Toastmaster. Empathy is defined as understanding and sharing the feelings of others. Put yourself in the other guy's shoe. Leadership is the art of motivating others to achieve a common goal. May I submit to you that good leadership cannot exist without empathy. And allow me to append to those definitions the ability to see the big picture and the ability to see the situation longer term. Fellow Toastmasters, Mr. Toastmasters, we don't have any guests today, but venture with me to the courthouse in Virginia, the Appomattox Courthouse, where two men were joined by fate. On one hand, we had the Supreme Commander of the Union Forces, General Ulysses S. Grant. And on the other hand, he was faced across the table by one Robert E. Lee, Commander of the Northern Army of Virginia and Supreme Commander of the Confederate States Forces. It was on April the 9th, that Sunday morning, when both men met at the table. But it had been 4 years since the Ordinance of Secession was signed first by South Carolina and followed quickly in succession by 10 other states, forming the Confederate States of America, which was led by one Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis had been a congressman and senator from Mississippi and a staunch Democrat. That morning, across the table, 4 years after the ordinance was signed, 3 years after a general was now been placed on the back pages of history, General George McClellan was fired by one Abraham Lincoln for his reticence, his failure to engage the Confederate forces. Grant came to power. It had been 3 years since war had been waging. 620,000 men lost their lives. Consider this, the US population decreased by more than 2%. In today's numbers, that would be 6 million people dying from that conflict. Now, the Union suffered about 360,000, about 100,000 more losses than the Confederate States. And when Jefferson Davis was unable to secure recognition by the European powers for his new country, and the fact that the North was much more industrialized and much more equipped, it was clear to Robert E. Lee, a warrior at heart and victor in many battles, that it was time to lay down the arms. And so, the Articles of Surrender were drafted, and both men sat across the table. Lee, very stoic and a professional at heart, and who had graduated from West Point near the top of his class 15 years prior to Ulysses S. Grant, was all about business and the security of the men who fought with him. Grant was enamored by meeting Lee for the first time. Lee had been his idol. He had heard about him when he was a student at West Point. And not sticking to the issues at the table, he was so interested in learning about Lee and Lee's life. Lee stuck to the script. The articles of surrender were signed. And with the rules of war, Robert E. Lee could have been captured and brought back to Washington. And it was a judgment call by Grant not to do that and to show empathy. And instead of arresting all of the top officers, he ordered his men to cook meals and feed the Confederate forces, helping to bring the Union back together. Now, you and I may not be generals, but in our own way, we can show empathy in our leadership. I have a personal example. There was a time when, and I'm no general, there was a time when my daughter was having a rough time in school, and I had no idea what to do because she was under a lot of stress. 3rd grade. Until I pulled out of the hat that my toughest grade in school had been the 3rd grade. True story. Somebody in their wisdom thought that, hey, this guy is smart, he's in the 1st grade, let's skip him to 3rd grade. And I had the roughest time. Once I told her that, and she looked at me, and she was comforted by that idea and knew that there was a rainbow waiting in the winds. Fellow Toastmasters, you too can show empathy. You don't have to be a 4-star general, but show empathy in your leadership. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.